Hey Dan,
Hey buddy, how are you?
good. Thanks a lot for the time. I thought it was, I just did the first six episodes of my first podcast, and I wanted to chat with you since I think you've done how many now? Over 80 or what, 100 podcast episodes?
Yeah, just over 100 on the two podcasts combined now. So
Which ones do you have? You're doing Iron Hack
the Iron Hack
podcast?
podcast, and then before we did the Startup Architects, but we stopped doing that now. But yeah, combined we're just over 100. But the Iron Hack podcast I think is on. Oh, I'm checking. 77. We just released 77.
Wow, 77 episodes. And you've also doing kind of some small video series with a journey into product. I don't know if you
Yeah.
consider those podcasts or not.
No, that content, I guess, much like this, just trying to I just try and cut out the fat and just have the quality content so I can make it short and manageable.
Yeah. Wow.
Because a
And
podcast is such a long form
yeah,
of
you're just there talking for a while. This one's what are like 5, 10 minutes, most of them, right?
yeah, that's the general plan. Sometimes it gets a bit longer. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've been doing it since when? 2020 or even longer? No.
Yeah, 2020 is when we started the Iron Hack one. I mean, you would know because you were on episode six.
So I was one of the first ones.
Episode 6 and then episode 66. So yeah, that's very symmetrical timing for you there. But yeah,
Wow. I mean, I do have to say that even though it was the sixth one, it already seemed quite professional. I remember sitting with you. You guys had the microphone set up. Even I think you guys were doing the chimes with a little instrument in there.
yeah. I mean, if you listen back to episode 6, though, now it's not so professional. But it was fun at the time. Yeah, and you've just done your sixth episode, so it's all very, you know,
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I really enjoyed, I was in your episode in Iron Hack number 66, and first of all, I really enjoyed it. I think you and Tim made me feel, I mean, I'm not an avid speaker, I'm not always talking, but I was really enjoying it. And you guys made it quite easy for me. And I also got some positive feedback from people saying they enjoyed the conversation.
right.
Again, I was one third of the conversation, so it was probably also for you, but I really enjoyed it. And I think it was part of that and some curiosity that made me kind of think about starting or testing my own.
Uh,
Um,
And how have you found like hosting so far?
well, so I've started, you wrote up a guide on how to create a podcast, right? You did that in Iron Hack. I'm going to put the link somewhere below because for me it was super useful. Um, and that's kind of my baseline. Learning about how it works, trying out the different tools.
Mhm.
Um, and I have to say, the first three episodes we did every like completely different on each because we were still trying to find like, hey, is this like a talk show? Do we
Yeah.
like interview people? Do we just memorize things and say it? How do we do it? And I would say like whoever listens to the first three episodes will notice that they are very different. Meanwhile, four, five, and six are now following like a bit more structure.
Yeah.
Um, was it the same for you, or did you have like from day one already like in set
No,
what
no.
what you
I
want?
mean, absolutely, it took us a while to find the stride that we have now. Um, so the first episodes we did, we just guessed the whole thing. I like wrote a running order out just at lunchtime, and then we just recorded it that afternoon. And we were just quite lucky. We had good like canter together, like the way Tim and I interact was always quite natural, so it was no big stress. And then I guess we were very lucky to have really good guests for like the first 10 episodes. We had really like engaging guests, and it wasn't until a little bit later on that we had how do you say it, more difficult guests to interview, which then.
How do you define a difficult guest? Because I mean, since I've done only six, I had three guests, and in all of them, all the are my cases so far, they've been, quite a friendly conversation, and we've spoken about something that maybe not necessarily they're passionate about, but
Mhm.
something that they know quite well. So there's no kind of like guessing on what to discuss. What has been difficult in some of your guests?
Sometimes you'll get a guest who will not talk very much, just like very short answers, like one word answers, or the opposite. Sometimes you'll get a guest who will just talk forever, and they can be equally difficult to like maintain like a good flow in the conversation. But you find ways around them, I think, a way to work with both, because in the context of the Iron Hack podcast, we're quite lucky because all of the guests are always, as you say, very passionate about the topic. Usually they're because they've done a boot camp, so it's about something that they're learning or something that they're really interested in. So it's really easy to have this kind of conversation. But you know, every now and again, you'll get someone who will maybe nerves are part of it, but it makes your job quite difficult as a host to make it entertaining, you know. So, but it's very rare. I think we've just been very lucky in our podcasting time. Yeah.
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 No, that makes sense, right? Especially, I mean, in the art context of Iron Hack, I think everybody has something in common, which I guess might make it easy to start off. You know, hey, you've done a boot camp, right? So it's kind of like a starter.
Yeah.
How has it been in the other podcasts where maybe there's not something in common? How do
Right.
you
Well,
how do you
exactly.
approach that?
And that's where my like examples are coming from somewhat, you know, when you get like real professionals in their field sometimes who are just, you know, been doing something for 10 plus 20 years. Sometimes they'll either be able to explain things very eloquently, just like really hard, complex topics they can explain really easily, or the opposite, where you'll get a guest who's so familiar with their topic that you'll ask them a question like, "Oh, so that must be difficult," and they're like, "Yes, it is." You know.
And
But,
yeah, no, that makes sense. Makes
yeah.
sense. And how have you approached, for example, like the technicality of it? Because you know, in the context of Iron Hack, you are talking to a wide audience, you know, from people with different backgrounds, with different ages, different interests. And at some point, you want to deep dive, maybe from your personal curiosity, into certain aspects. But at the same time, you want to keep it broad and simple enough for the
Yeah.
audience to stay engaged for the 45 minutes, 1 hour. How have you kind of combined that in depth versus broadness?
So the way I always try and do it, and the way I think you might find useful is if it try and keep it in the context of like the learning itself. So let's say we're talking about um, cloud service providers or cloud solutions, right? And with something that's reasonably complicated, if you have no idea about it, then always try and frame it in like the context of, okay, when I was learning about this technical topic, I found these things interesting, and this is how I maintained my learning. Because that way you can still push a little bit into it, but keep the audience in a position where they can somewhat relate, you know? Sometimes we go off on tangents where we get really deep into like different, you know, JavaScript libraries or, you know, new backend architectures or something, but we try and pull it back on course. And plus, I'm not actually that technical, so I don't get pulled into that trap very often,
Yeah.
thankfully. Yeah.
No, no, makes sense. For me, I mean, in the the three episodes we've done, you know, for context, the topic is product management in Spanish, um, because I've noticed that there hasn't been so much material in that space. It's always almost always in English, and it's fine. But I realized that at least in the Spanish speaking countries, all the tech companies. Um, Basically they're using all the Spanish terminology and all the material. And for me, what makes sense is to adapt from from a side of culture, right? It's not the same the German culture than the American culture than the Latin culture, and like trying to copy and paste frameworks and ideas that are used in Silicon Valley in South America. You can learn a lot, but I think sometimes it's not replaceable. It's a different context. So that's kind of the topic we chose. But in one of the episodes, number five, actually, we talked about someone who has been working in cryptocurrency for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And you know, crypto, I think it's one of the topics where I think everybody thinks they understand it, but they could, you know, not be able to summarize it. And we were just starting the discussion and, you know, trying to be goes very straightforward. And then started defining one thing after the other. And after 20, 30 minutes of episode, I realized like we haven't talked about anything yet. We've just been defining things for people to understand. So it's been very tricky. And then only when we applied it was it like a bit more familiar, but it really took a while to say like what are the baseline definitions we need for to clarify for our audience. Not sure.
Well, where have you been getting your kind of topics or your, your baselines for? If it's, I guess there's not a lot of Spanish language product management specific content out there. So are you trailblazing that whole field, or do you where what are you just relying on your guests to lead the way, or how are you doing?
Yeah, so I mean, at first, we wanted to start from like our idea with Paula, who's the person I'm doing it with, was to start from scratch. So, for example, like episode one is like, what is product management? Like, we have like five different definitions of what product management is. Then episode two, we go into like the theory of product discovery, and only in episode three and further do we actually talk about a bit more product management in practice, managing stakeholders, building actual products, and then speaking to guests about how real life is. So the way that we thought about it was, if you're episode six or seven or whenever it comes next, and you don't understand something, we say, okay, go back to episode one. Kind of that's the approach we're taking. So then that the
Yeah.
idea is that we could grow with our audience so
Mhm.
that we increase complexity and our audience kind of listens to the beginning and they are catching up with us. So we
Okay.
try to define things as we go on.
So a little tip there. Try very hard not to date your episodes with any kind of like goings on. So if you listen to our early episodes, we're still talking about like Donald Trump doing things when he was still in power, and so like, or when he was, still causing trouble. So yeah, we have learned now to keep them on topic and away from any kind of dating thing.
Yeah.
You can tell actually on the topic of crypto, you can tell up until about episode 30 or 40, we talk about the price of Bitcoin. So you can tell by when we recorded it on the general pricing of where Bitcoin is.
But why do you say this? Do you think that when someone listens to something from the past with a specific date, it becomes not relevant to them anymore?
It's not that it becomes unrelevant, but if you want to keep it as like a timeless learning thing, it's better to just have it on the subject material. An anecdote about your life is always fine, but just try not to talk about like, oh, did you see that football score or whatever, the results of the tennis? It doesn't matter. Something that's very current, that dates it very, very quickly. And then when you listen to it, it's quite jarring because then you're like, how long ago was this
Yeah,
recorded?
what does it matter? Yeah, yeah, I
Yes, but
understand.
this is something we didn't realize at first, that now that we specifically try not to do, we keep it just a little bit more like on topic. So yeah.
No, makes sense.
But to speak to what you said earlier about did we find our way very quickly? I think you're gonna go through a few more iterations, specifically the introduction and how you start the podcast is a very, I can
Yeah.
tell that you've had a few experiments yourself, but
Yeah, we tried it, and it's interesting for me that, and this is also one of the reasons I wanted to do it in Spanish, is that I feel like a lot of these things in English I'm quite comfortable with speaking about it, like coming up with so many things from the top of my head, just like spontaneously. But since I haven't worked in Spanish in a long time, I feel like it sounds very unnatural because this is like my personal life has been in Spanish, but my professional life has been in English.
okay.
So it's been like, oh, what do I say? How do I talk about it? And then you just start saying a bunch of English words. And then I got some feedback from some of our audience that says, dude, half the podcast was in English. Like just so that was one of the the things. So we've tried to do a lot of iterations. We've tried like um, sometimes, for example, like putting out all the words that we're going to use in Spanish beforehand so that we can always refer to that.
Mhm.
Um, we've tried having a shorter intro, a longer intro, many things, and I think we're going to keep experimenting with it. It's a never-ending process, and um, what we haven't created yet, and I'm curious if you have, is um, that closeness or that sense of community with our podcast audience,
Mm.
where we can somehow get direct feedback from them, except for maybe some friends and family who have been like very helpful in saying like, hey, I like this, but this was like too long, this was too kind of didn't understand. I'm curious on that end, how and if you have created some way of getting kind of real-time feedback from some of your audience members.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first thing is just make sure you set up like an email or something so you can say at the end of the podcast. We always say if you want to reach out to us directly, you can email us here or you can find us on LinkedIn here. Um, yeah, and it works pretty well. We get feedback from people, usually just people, giving nice messages. Sometimes it's people requesting topics. So that is the very first way to do it is to make sure at the beginning and the end of every podcast, you just have a little sign off that will just give them an avenue and then just put the link in your description of every episode. So make sure every episode has a template in the description and then you can just change the parts that are for that episode specific. But the rest of it should always be the same contact information. And that way it's whenever anyone's listening, they can just find you immediately and then they can send something.
And has that been helpful for you? Have you tried to implement what the audience mentions, or
Now
has it just been guide?
we ignore everything that comes to us.
Really?
No, of course not. No, but we've been very, very, very lucky actually that we've had very few, if any, like negative comments or even suggestions for how the show should be. We've had some really cool feedback from people saying like, hey, I listened to your podcast and then it made me do the boot camp and now I'm a software engineer and it's because we listened to this episode. Or even a few Ironhack employees listened to our podcast and then before they applied for the job and how they're working there. These are really nice feedbacks to get. And other than that, we've just had a few times where we've requested like, okay, someone send us in questions or someone send us in something for a feature. And we've had a few bits of feedback like that. I think probably because no one cares so much to write as an email saying like, change this, do that, do that. But we either get positive feedback, which is obviously amazing and always appreciated, or we get feedback we've requested, like, someone send us in your portfolio and we can talk about it or whatever. So only really this sense, but just make sure you set up that information avenue so that people know how to find you.
No, makes sense. And maybe as a final point, to see how you have been evolving, right? You are, I am right now where you were when you interviewed me the first time, episode 6, just beginning, just trying to get the flow. Where would you say you are now, and where would you like to get next? What is the kind of the next jump for maybe not the podcast that you are doing yourself, but maybe for yourself as a podcaster?
For sure, in order for you to get to where we are now, I suppose, is just not to quit. That sounds like a very obvious thing, but so many episodes never make it. Like the number is crazy. Like 98% of new podcasts never make it past episode 10. And then after that, it's episode 20 is a huge landmark. And then eventually you'll get into a routine. And we are now in that routine. For a while at the beginning of this year, Tim and I were doing 2 podcasts a week. And it was very easy for us to maintain because we set up such a solid structure. So that structure is we set up a recording time. So every Tuesday evening between like 6 and 9 is the recording time. And it's just that. So every time we have a guest, we don't have to go messing around with their time and hours. We just say, pick any Tuesday and then it's booked. And then that just falls into place then. You don't have to think about it until Monday evening to prepare for Tuesday. And this really changed the whole timeline because before that we were recording on like Sundays or Monday lunchtime or whenever we could fit it in. So the structure really helped like make it a routine. And then after that, when I can't do episodes, Tim will do it without me. Tim's my co-host for anyone who doesn't know. And if he can't do an episode, I'll stand in. So between us, we just keep this as a routine. And then that's got us to where we are now, which is a really easy place. It's just fun to jump on now and record. In terms of where I want to be next, it's an interesting question. I don't know. I'm still really enjoying the podcast as it is. Like, it's just interesting to talk to people. I think we would like to do a road show, get a bus, maybe a private jet, fly around interviewing people, something like that. But I mean, who knows? I think that there's a few more things we can do with the podcast. And
Is
one
there
of
any topic that you would like to talk about that you haven't yet?
Yeah, I mean, in the world of tech, it's quite a deep, a broad spectrum of things I want to discover. I'd like to do more product process related things. I think there's some rumblings of a podcast in TrueNode, which is a company you and I know, which is very product related, which I might have a hand in. So maybe there I can score,
Oh, that's
but we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, and in terms of like product, the podcasting itself, I think it's just guests. I want to keep on speaking to cool people. What about you? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be in 70 episodes?
I'm currently at that point where I'm thinking about I'm doing that checkpoint like, hey, I've done six.
Okay.
We've done something that we have enjoyed. Let's see
Yep.
what comes next. So I'm at that point where it's kind of inflection. Do we keep the topic? Do we adjust the topic? Do we adjust the format? And for me, that the most challenging part has been kind of this consistently of getting good guests for that time frame. So that's something that if I want to keep going, I need to maybe do it in the same format. Hey, pick any Tuesday, but at this time, and we lock it in, and you don't have to be around chasing people. And I think if I commit to doing that aspect, the rest, once you have the person, you just talk, you record, you edit, and you publish. So I think it's for me specifically that angle. Um, and maybe Dan, to finish us off, if there's someone there listening and says, "Hey, podcasting looks cool, I want to try it," what would be one tip you give them to yeah to start off?
Um, I think whatever your podcast is about, just make sure it's something that it's like something you're passionate about talking about, because some people will fall into this trap about finding a topic that they think people are going to like, and maybe that's where they want to go, but then you run out very quickly of passion for it. And it shouldn't just be the topic, it should be the community for me. So, Ironhack is what it is outside of an organization, is just a community of people who are changing their lives all the time. And this is
Mhm.
such a good spectrum of people that's what's kept me going and interested in it, is that one week we're speaking to someone who used to be a dancer and now they're a software engineer. The next week we're talking to someone who used to be, working in a hotel and now they're a senior UX designer for Lego, or I don't know, some big company, and they all have a very interesting story. So I mean, that's the thing that keeps the passion, make sure the people you're speaking to are interesting, I think.
Awesome, Dan. I can't think of a better ending, so thanks so much for that. Um,
Yeah, and good luck. I hope to speak to you. Let's speak again at episode 60.
yeah, let's do it and a review. When if I ever get to 60, then I think you'll be at 300. So let's
Yeah, well,
catch up again there.
we won't get that far. Maybe let's do it at episode 25 just to keep it in that.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks a lot. Um,
Sure, buddy. Bye bye.